After the disastrous effects of both external and internal turmoil during the late Qing dynasty, the two Chinese leaders, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, sought to bring China back into the ring of superpowers. Yet the way they would do so differed greatly, and although Chiang and Mao succeeded in establishing a ceasefire against Japan, they failed to compromise, which ultimately resulted in a conflict that would divide China to this day. Despite attempts by Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek at unifying China during and after World War II against the enemy that was Japan, the Communist and Nationalist parties of China failed to reach a long-lasting resolution and ascended into a full-scale civil war due to their irreconcilable political ideologies, the personal conflicts between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, and the failed concession between the two parties on the grounds of territory and military acquisition. In order to analyze why this was so, we must first understand the historical context in terms of the individuals involved.
Mao, a peasant from Hunan province, was traditionally taught in Confucian methods and had grown up an overwhelmingly patriotic young man, although he also developed a hatred of the Qing. Unlike Chiang, Mao became a firm believer in communism after being first exposed to Marxism-Leninism while working at Peking University. He believed that communism was the solution to saving China and that power only comes from the people. Using his persuasive ability, Mao harbored the untapped potential of a Chinese peasant force, one capable of decimating all imperialists, warlords, and corrupted officials, bringing his communist ideals to life.
那么这些代表的更广大的人是中国的数亿农民。毛主席带领着这个共产党到以江来发动一个土地改革，让更多的人拥有土地，更多的人拥有生产资料，拥有耕牛，拥有生产资料通过这种方式呢，他获得了当地的老百姓的一个最大的一个支持。那我觉得这种方式的话，是在当时就在1920年代到1940年代的中国是一个非常有效的一个推广手段。
Chiang, born into a well-off family, rose to power during the late 1920s. Unlike Mao, Chiang believed in democracy, taking a Western approach to his government. More specifically, he believed in the People's Three Principles, a definitive guide to creating a stable, democratic republic. In addition to his democratic ideals, Chiang was prevalent in his hatred of the Qing dynasty. As he once said, if imperialism is not banished from the country, China will perish as a nation, and if China does not perish, then imperialism cannot remain.
因为他们代表着不同的阶层的利益。蒋介石他代表的是大官僚、大资本家，共产党为代表的这个毛泽东，他们代表的是工农阶级，也就是当时中国最广大的阶层的利益。当时中国是大概是有4亿到5亿人口。
Although the two parties remained mutually hostile and intended each other's complete destruction, the CPC intermittently allied with the KMT under the United Front to resist the Japanese invasion during the Second Sino-Japanese War. According to a Warsaw Change by C.P. Fitzgerald and M. Roper, the Japanese slogan was "Kill all, burn all, loot all." In doing so, they killed all young men, destroyed or stole all cattle, and broke farmers' tools and grain. However, Chiang believed that China was too large a country for the Japanese to occupy without exhausting themselves, and defined his approach as trading space to buy time. The culmination of this deep dissatisfaction in response to Chiang's strategy came in December 1936. When during a visit to Xi'an, Chiang was seized by mutinous GMD troops and was handed over to the communists. Under pressure, Chiang reluctantly agreed to the formation of the Second GMD-CCP United Front, pledging to wage unceasing war against the Japanese aggressors. Nevertheless, to quote the book Mao's China by Michael Lynch, Chiang for his part did not feel bound by his Xi'an promises and frequently went back on his word by renewing his attacks on the communists. The irreconcilable conflicts and mutual distrust between nationalists and communists meant that they rarely acted as a combined force. As Chiang Kai-shek expressed himself candidly, "The Japanese are disease of the skin, it can be cured. The communists are disease of the soul, it affects the whole body." Even though the communists reorganized their army as the 8th Route Army and the new 4th Army and put them nominally under KMT direction, the CCP and GMD forces invariably fought as separate armies and engaged mainly in guerrilla warfare tactics. Unfortunately, the complete failure of the United Front to mount sustained resistance led to Japan's occupation of Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Nanjing by 1938. However, after another 7 years of fighting, in August 1945, Japan eventually surrendered and China would be at peace for now.
Following the defeat of Japan in early 1945, Chiang and Mao attempted a peace negotiation known as the Chongqing Peace Talks later that year in order to lessen the political tension at the time. These were the main conflicting arguments between the two leaders.
能维持现状，解放区的军队、政权都要保留，建立联合政府来上菜叶。
你交出政权，交出军队，我在这个5院里头各给你增加一个副院长。如果你愿意担任实职的话，可以委任你为新疆省政府主席。
开价如此之低，实在让人难以接受。
Following the meeting of one day during the negotiations, Mao made the following remarks. Mr. Chiang always believes that there can only be one sun in the sky, and there cannot be two sovereigns in one country. I just don't believe it. I will show him that two suns can exist in one sky. After 3 weeks of negotiation in Chongqing, Chiang and Mao announced a bilateral pact, agreeing to suspend hostilities and form an all-party government. However, just a year later, in 1946, fighting between the CCP and KMT soon stirred up again in Manchuria. In hopes of bringing the two factions together, the Truman administration sent General George Marshall on a diplomatic mission which many considered to be impossible. According to Jeffrey G. Barlow, Marshall successfully manipulated the Nationalists to a 15-day ceasefire, but the efforts were in vain, as both sides would not surrender, nor would truce. In the final months of 1946, Marshall desperately attempted to reason with the parties, but found it to be of no use. As Marshall put it in his letter to Dr. Vannevar Bush on December 28, 1946, there is little scientific evidence in this present job of mine. It is an intensely realistic problem, a human, provoking, pathetic tragedy. The negotiations were over. It was time for war. There were 3 main wars and battles that would ultimately crown a victor, those being the 5 encirclement campaigns from 1930 to 1934, the Battle of Yan'an of 1947, and the Civil War of 1947 to 1949. During the first 4 encirclement campaigns in Jiangxi province, Mao's forces hid among the well-known local terrain and were opportunistic in their strikes using Mao's famous tactic known as guerrilla warfare. They were well prepared and mercilessly defeated the clueless nationalist forces. However, in the 5th campaign, Chiang decided to alter his attack, advancing his troops while building fortifications around the Red Army's perimeter. The communists were boxed in, nowhere to go, and cut off from supplies. And so, in 1934, October 16th, what's now known as the Long March begins, where a depleted communist force of 86,000 troops and 15,000 personnel would flee from Jiangxi to regroup in Yan'an. 12 years later, in 1947, Chiang, bearing a tremendous lead over the Red Army in terms of forces, decided to begin the invasion and attack on Yan'an. As the battle waged on, the communists had to make a choice, either spend its troops defending Yan'an or use them to capture Manchurian territories. Mao, having said the following, "If we defend Yan'an, we will lose it anyway. If we take Manchuria, we can capture Yan'an later," opted for the latter. Despite losing Yan'an, after 17 months of continuous fighting, Mao had killed, wounded, and captured 1,690,000 nationalist troops. And in 1948, the communist progress accelerated to new heights, and for the first time, Mao's forces exceeded that of Chiang's, the nationalists even regarding them as a human sea. By the year's end, Mao had effectively occupied all territories north of the Yangtze River. After another year of fighting goes by, on October 1st, 1949, the then 50-year-old Mao Zedong addresses the nation from Tiananmen Square, declaring that the People's Republic of China is founded today. My personal experience of the struggle between the nationalists and the communists after the war can be summed up in one word: uncertainty. There is a sense in which the Chinese Civil War has not ended. No formal peace treaty or agreement has ever been made. The 2 Chinese states that emerged from the Civil War, the PRC and Taiwan, follow very different paths. The short-term significance following the conflict would result in Chiang and his approximate 2 million soldiers retreating to Formosa, forming the Republic of China, while Mao would undoubtedly stay in the mainland, enacting other revolutions such as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Looking forward, despite both parties staying as separate entities of government through and beyond their respective deaths in 1975 and 1976, together, they paved the way towards modern forms of government, fixing the disasters that both internal and external conflicts had inflicted on China. But in the end, although their paths diverged through attaching to separate political and personal ideologies, their collective rule would change the course of Chinese history forever.